Breaking tonight, new fallout from last night's GOP primary, which is significantly increasing the chances of a historic fight to claim the mantle of the Republican Party. Good evening and welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. The final tally from Wisconsin's GOP primary shows Senator Ted Cruz winning by double digits, earning 48% of the vote to Donald Trump's 35. Governor Kasich came in third with 14%. Senator Cruz had been up in the last poll before Wisconsin by 10. He exceeded that margin last night with a 13-point victory over Donald Trump. The delegate count tonight now stands at 743 for Trump, 517 for Cruz, and 143 for Kasich. The magic number to clinch the nomination before the Republican National Convention in July is 1,237. Tonight, the political analysts say it is looking more and more likely that no candidate will reach that threshold, forcing the party to select a nominee at a contested convention. Just about 24 hours ago, Senator Ted Cruz predicted that his victory in Wisconsin would change this race.
Tonight is a turning point. It is a rallying cry. It is a call from the hardworking men and women of Wisconsin to the people of America. And as a result of tonight, as a result of the people of Wisconsin defying the media, defying the pundits, I am more and more convinced that our campaign is going to earn the 1,237 delegates needed to win the Republican nomination.
Joining us tonight on all of the fallout, Ed Goaz, who's a pollster for the Our Principles PAC, which spent over $2 million to defeat Donald Trump in Wisconsin. David Wohl is an attorney and Donald Trump supporter. But we begin tonight with Bill Hemmer, co-host of America's Newsroom, to take us through the remainder of this race to win the nomination. My friend Bill, good to see you.
How are you, Cal? This is not science, okay?
Good.
This is just like a road map. I don't know if it's a paved road or a dirt road, but we're going to find out, okay? We crunched the numbers, all the remaining contests we have, trying to figure out how this could go, all right? Wyoming comes up in about 9 days from now. We think Cruz is going to get most of those. That's a state convention, by the way. And then we move 2 weeks from now in New York. We think based on polling. And we're going to be generous in some areas, and we will not be so generous in other areas to find out how Donald Trump gets to the magic number right now with Wyoming. He's at 751. New York State, if he gets to 50% across all the districts, he gets all the delegates. The week after that, Rhode Island, we're giving Trump delegates here, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania. So now we're at the end of April, and we are now at 925, 312 delegates shy of the magic number. So in the month of May, Megyn, first Tuesday, Indiana, we think right now that's pretty good for Trump. Pumps him to 967. A week later, it's West Virginia, winner take all. Trump gets that based on our survey to date. That same day, however, Nebraska is winner take all, and we think that, for the moment, we'll go to Ted Cruz. Now we move third week in May. Oregon's a little bit of a split right now, so we'll divvy it up a little bit here. Same for Washington State. And now you move to the 7th of June with 5 contests remaining. We think on that day, Ted Cruz will get winner take all in Montana, same for South Dakota. New Mexico's pretty much of a 50-50 split, so we'll bump Trump's number to 1040, up 10. 2 on the map still. California, as of today, Trump would get 100 delegates, and that same day, New Jersey is winner take all, which puts Trump at 1,191, 46 shy of the magic number of 1,237. So, Megyn, now you see the tight road that he must ride with about 150 unbound delegates that we'll get to on another night still in the offing. This will change. We just don't know how.
Fascinating.
Check back in a week.
Bill, great to see you.
You too, Meg.
So in the hours since Fox News called the Wisconsin race for Senator Cruz, the Trump supporters have said this is just a blip on the radar, while those who support the senator call it a turning point in this entire race. Joining me now, Ed Goaz and David Wohl. Good to see you both. So, Ed,
hi, Megyn.
What is the evidence that this is a turning point as opposed to an anomaly? Because in Wisconsin, Ted Cruz had a very popular governor backing him. He had your group spending a lot of money against him. And, you know, it was an electorate that many people say looks very different from the other electorates, and that could be motivated in particular by local talk radio, which isn't as big a factor in some of these other states coming up.
Well, I think, number one, it's a turning point because it probably does increase the likelihood that this is going to go to a contested convention. But I think more importantly, what we've been seeing in the numbers, and we've talked about this before, is that there's been this growing intensity amongst the 1/3 of the Republican voters that are not pro-Trump, in fact, are anti-Trump. And it's grown almost to the point that it matches the intensity and the enthusiasm of the 1/3 that is for Trump. What you saw in Wisconsin was that the 35% he got matched the 35% he's gotten as an average in all these primaries. There's always been a question on how high can his ceiling go, and whether you look at the popular vote, which has him at 38%, or the average of all the primaries, where he's at 35%, he definitely is below that 40% mark, which means that there's a very large component out there that is against him. And as we've talked again before, it's driven very much by married women. But one of the surprises in Wisconsin last night was that there was no gender gap. We saw about 2 weeks ago married men with children at home beginning to become more negative towards Trump. But in our polling, we had women 15 points against Trump, and we had men only 5 points. Last night, they both matched that 13% negative mark.
That's the thing, David, is there was no gender gap because the men also turned on him who are outside of that core group of supporters. So, you know, who knows exactly what that can be attributed to, but the point is, with Trump having several big contests coming up, and his numbers look great in New York, but that state will be proportional, what does he do to bring people above and beyond that 35, 38% into the fold?
Well, Megan, remember, Florida was 46%. New York looks like it's over 50% as it stands right now, and he's about 35 points ahead of Ted Cruz. I mean, this is a red herring, this idea that there's some kind of a ceiling.
Well,
he's going to get 95 delegates in New York.
Just to tell the audience, this is from the Fox News First Note this morning. He had a few grand slams in states where he cleared 40%, Massachusetts, Florida, and Nevada. Right. But taken together, Trump has won 37% of the vote in the primaries held so far.
And Megan, it is ultimately, as we know, all about the delegates. And I liked Bill's assessment at the Billboard. I would disagree with one thing. He said that California would give Trump 100 delegates. I think it's going to go much higher and much closer to the 172. And if you use that calculation based on what Bill assessed, that's going to get him over the 1237. Megan, I'm telling you right now that this establishment endorsement of Ted Cruz will end up creating a huge problem for him. When you got Jeb Bush, you got Scott Walker, you've got Lindsey Graham endorsing him. I mean, what does that tell voters who think that Ted Cruz is an outsider who's coming in to change things?
That theory suggests that he needs to win without any sort of mainstream Republican support. He's not going to win with just Glenn Beck behind him. Whoever the nominee is going to be needs to add more Republicans into the mix.
But why are they supporting him? Why are they supporting Ted Cruz instead of Donald Trump? Because they feel that he's going to be malleable to amend his platform to match the establishment, or they're just going to set him up for an ambush like Donald Trump thinks as a Trojan horse. We get the convention and bring
That's
in
what Donald
Paul
Trump
Ryan,
is calling Ted
somebody
Cruz
else
now.
who's outside of the whole
Go ahead,
window right now.
The interesting thing about all this establishment, we were talking about where the voters, the everyday voters across the country are voting. And the everyday voters across the country, 62% have not voted for Donald Trump. This is not an establishment conspiracy. This is he's not getting the support. At this point in President, George W. Bush's campaign, his first campaign, he was getting 65%.
But what do you make of the numbers? A poll just came out today, Ed, that showed Trump at 52% in New York among the Republicans who are going to vote.
And those same polls, and look, you're getting into what I do every day. Polls change as the time gets closer and people focus. These same polls had Trump at 65% just a few weeks ago. Just like going into Wisconsin, they had him up by 10 points 4 weeks out.
But this is after all the controversy that was generated over the past few weeks in the Trump campaign. That's an April 3rd to 5th poll.
You're not talking about 10 points here.
Hold on, let him finish and I'll get to you, David.
One of the interesting things is all this talk about the last week is what cost Trump Wisconsin. He was 10 points down before the last week even happened. All it did was add brushstrokes to the negative feelings that many of the voters had out there. It didn't drive it. It didn't settle it. It moved or completed that picture perhaps a little bit more. But this is not something that happened that he lost Wisconsin because of the establishment and his bad week that he had out there. It's the 2 months of campaigning out there that a lot of voters are turning off to.
Wisconsin's a hyper-local problem for him. It happened because the people have a great passion for their governor, Scott Walker. They're big on the talk radio guys who absolutely hammered Donald Trump. And you know what? He conceded in the end. And he lost rather, by about what the polls were showing, 10 versus 13. He's going to move on. And Megan, as I said before, New York is the big deal. The Big Apple is the big deal. If he takes 95 delegates there, I mean, from that point forward, the task for Ted Cruz will be impossible.
It's tough to get 95, though, given how New York is proportional. So we'll see how that shakes out.
But if he's over 50%.
You'd certainly rather have Donald Trump's numbers at this point than anybody else's coming into this state. Great to see you both.
Yep.
Good seeing you, Maggie.
Just a couple of weeks ago, PBS host Tavis Smiley seemed to be supporting Donald Trump. But in the last 24 hours, he's taken to calling him a, quote, racial arsonist. Tonight, we'll question Smiley on that change and then get reaction from Trump supporter Herman Cain. Plus, we have an eye-opening report next on what's being called the shadow primary and how it could change this race as RNC Chair Reince Priebus joins us to help explain. And then, a former top Trump advisor has now issued a serious threat to any delegate thinking of, quote, stealing the vote away from Donald Trump. That's just ahead.
We're going to have protests, demonstrations. We will disclose the hotels and the room numbers of those delegates who are directly involved in the stealing.
Breaking tonight, new details on what could ultimately decide the Republican nomination. The race some are calling the shadowy primary. Shadow primary. The candidates know that when they arrive in Cleveland this July, some uncommitted delegates will be able to vote for any candidate. That means that rounding up these delegates now could be the key to winning the nomination in a close fight. We have Republican National Committee Chairman Reince Priebus with us on that, but for the first in a series of Kelly File reports on the convention in Cleveland, we go to our chief Washington correspondent, James Rosen, on the shadow primary. James?
Megan, good shadowy evening to you. The demands of this so-called shadow primary, the quiet wooing down at the state level of the men and women who will serve as delegates to the Republican convention this summer, are increasingly being reflected in the travel schedules of the two leading candidates. Wind from Wisconsin at his back, Texas Senator Ted Cruz heads on Saturday to the state GOP convention in Colorado, where he peeled away 6 delegates in congressional district assemblies this past weekend. GOP frontrunner Donald Trump is also planning to visit Colorado in coming days. Trump's team acknowledges that the Cruz operation is more evolved, that the billionaire real estate mogul is, quote, playing catch-up. But they also maintain that the state delegations are playing Ted Cruz.
What makes you think that when it gets to this third and fourth ballot that the Cruz folks are preying on, that they are not going to be voting for Mitt Romney or Marco Rubio or Paul Ryan or whoever it is? They're going to be like, Ted who? They're using Ted right now as a vessel to try to stop Donald Trump.
Convention delegates are usually local Republican activists, by definition creatures of the establishment. Indeed, in exchange for enduring the dreariest winter meetings, tinkering with arcane allocation rules and ballot issues, the largest reward they receive is their quadrennial attendance at the party convention. The number of delegates who become unbound surges from 5% on the first ballot to 59% on the second. Since these delegates are part of a local power structure that often includes a governor or a state party chairman and so on, some analysts question how unbound these delegates ever really become. Mercedes Schlapp takes a different view.
I do think that the delegate, since they've been so active in the party, they're going to have they might be influenced somewhat by the state party officials, but at the same time, they're their own individual person who's going to decide straight on who they want to support.
And we also know that the RNC has been holding meetings with key operatives here in Washington to plot out the mechanics of a contested convention. And those meetings themselves, Megan, have been very, very shadowy.
That's the theme. James, great to see you.
Likewise.
Joining me now, Republican National Committee Chairman Reince Priebus. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for being here. There's a shadow primary. So basically, I mean, this actually comes as news, I think, to a lot of people, which is, it sheds a lot of light on Ted Cruz's belief that he can wrap up 1237 before he gets, to that first vote. And so the way he would need to do it, because he's probably not going to get 80% of the vote going forward, which is what he'd need, is to get these other delegates, like the delegates in Pennsylvania that aren't really bound. And you tell me whether he could also get Rubio and Kasich's delegates if those two guys got out, or at least Rubio's.
Well, certainly. I mean, it's sort of two different things going on. On one hand, you have the allocation of delegates, meaning when you win that state and candidate X gets 25 delegates, in most cases, those 25, no matter who they are, they could hate candidate X, but on one or two ballots, they're going to have to vote for candidate X. The same analysis is true for people who are unbound on the first ballot. So if a candidate is really, really close, they will have an opportunity, if there's a couple hundred unbound delegates on the first ballot, say Marco delegates or someone else's delegates, to then convince them to come on board on the first ballot.
Mm-hmm. Now already we're hearing complaints by the Trump camp that this election is going to be stolen from him. And we played the soundbite earlier of a longtime Donald Trump associate and former operative on his campaign, Roger Stone, who came out and said this, and he doubled down on it today. Listen.
If Trump does not run the table on the rest of the primaries and the caucuses, we're looking at a very, very narrow path in which the kingmakers go all out to cheat, to steal, and to snatch this nomination from the candidate who was overwhelmingly selected by the voters, which is why I have urged Trump supporters, come to Cleveland, march on Cleveland, join us in the Forest City. We're going to have protests, demonstrations. We will disclose the hotels and the room numbers of those delegates who are directly involved in the steal.
Your thoughts on that, Mr. Chairman?
Well, I mean, he's a smart person, but it's totally over the line. And we're going to have $50 million in security. We'll make sure that every delegate is safe. Here's the thing. A majority wins. A majority wins everywhere across this country. It's how our country was founded. It's what our founding fathers believed in. It was good enough for Abraham Lincoln. It's good enough in 2016. It's not a matter about who gets a plurality. It's about who gets a majority. You have to have a majority of delegates on the floor, and the delegates have the ultimate say, empowered by the voters in those states. So
are you going to do anything to the rules if Trump or somebody else, for that matter, is 50 short or 100 short of 1237? Are you going to do anything to the rules to make it easier or harder for that person to get over the line?
I'm not going to do anything to either help or hurt anybody. I'm going to run an open, honest, and fair convention, and the delegates are going to decide, and the delegates, by majority, are going to make all the decisions that they need to make at the convention. It's the same thing we do every 4 years.
It's going to be an interesting July. It's great to see you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan.
For more on this business of this former Trump advisor threatening convention delegates who switch from one candidate to another, we've got townhall.com news editor and Fox News contributor Katie Pavlich and Washington Times political columnist Charlie Hurt. Katie, your thoughts on Roger Stone so explicitly, obviously, sounding the threat to delegates that if they leave Mr. Trump, they're going to have him and, I guess, Mr. Trump's constituents to answer to?
Well, the first thing I think we need to address is that Roger Stone is accusing delegates who change of stealing an election, when the fact is that if Donald Trump wants to be the nominee, he needs to lock up 1237 before the primary process is over. If not, we go to an open convention. But in terms of the threats that have been issued, this is par for the course for the Trump campaign. I mean, you saw Donald Trump saying there might be riots if he doesn't become the nominee. You have many of his surrogates essentially justifying violence because because people are upset with the way the country is going. And for Roger Stone to now say that he's going to give out the hotel rooms of delegates, it's a mob. It's not the way that we work in American society when it comes to the election. Instead, they should be focusing their energy on trying to convince delegates not to leave Donald Trump through policy positions, but instead they're sticking a mob onto people, which, by the way, has serious consequences when people actually show up to intimidate and threaten real people who are going to the convention.
Charlie, was this appropriate?
It certainly sounds over the line to me, but I also understand that, you know, the entire Trump candidacy represents a lot of people who are deeply, deeply frustrated, and they have been very frustrated for a very long time with the political process. And you know, all this talk about the rules at the convention and contested convention and what are they, in bound delegates and unbound delegates, all of this obscures a far larger, more important problem that the Republican Party has, and that is that the Republican Party, and I think Katie would agree with me, in a lot of ways has completely lost touch with its voters. And while Katie may not agree that Donald Trump is the right person to pick up the baton and you know, gather those voters, he has successfully done that. And when he came out of the gate 8 months ago and started talking about immigration and started talking about trade and all these things where the Republican Party had very much left its core voters, the Republican establishment, they laughed at him, they mocked him, they mocked the issues, they called him a racist, and it only it just exacerbated this problem to the situation we have now.
But the thing is, Katie, even though Mr. Trump's message has resonated so strongly with such a huge faction of the Republican Party, it needs to resonate with at least 51% in order for him to get the nomination.
Well, and we can talk about the issues that Donald Trump has brought to the forefront. And yes, Charlie, we would have some agreement on the direction the Republican Party has gone over the course of the past couple of years and even the past couple decades. But the issue here is the way that the Trump campaign and his allies are handling people who dare defect from Donald Trump, whether it's reporters asking him questions about affirmative action after a campaign rally, or whether it's delegates deciding that they might want to go with a different candidate, and Roger Stone openly declaring a mob to go and visit the hotel room. He explicitly stated that they should go visit the delegates if they dare steal the election, which is not, it's a lie. No one's stealing an election. And for him to say go visit them at their hotel rooms, it's a threat, it's intimidation, and it will have consequences if these Trump supporters choose to act on those directions and instructions from
I mean,
Roger
obviously,
Stone.
Charlie, those delegates should be able to do what the rules allow them to do without fear of intimidation.
Sure. Absolutely. And just to make one thing clear, that as you pointed out, Megan, you know, Roger Stone does not work for the campaign, and I don't think was speaking for the campaign.
Correct. He's not officially associated with them anymore.
Yeah.
But they talk.
But that doesn't excuse it. That doesn't excuse. It's the kind of language that does not help, especially in a situation like this.
It's not like the delegates are swimming in dough and can show up with their own private security. And it's like, no problem, I got my bodyguard here. It's like these are regular people.
Exactly. But, you know, it's been 40 years since we've seen anything like this in terms of the fracturing of the party. And, you know, and in 1976, when we had this situation, Ronald Reagan at the last minute, you know, walked into the convention and obviously gave up his delegates for Gerald Ford to save him the embarrassment of having to go through the rigmarole that we may be about to go through now. But there is none of that sort of magnanimity on anyone's part right now, whether it's Donald Trump or even Ted Cruz, talking about people revolting if the establishment doesn't give let the nomination go to one of them.
No, do not hold out for the magnanimous candidate. It's not gonna happen. Great to see you both.
Thanks, Megan.
Thanks,
so
Megan.
we are also hearing reports that both the Trump and the Cruz campaigns are considering a new strategy to win future voters. Dana Perino is here on that just ahead. Plus, why has PBS host Tavis Smiley gone from suggesting Donald Trump is a political option to calling him a, quote, racial arsonist? We'll ask him next and also get reaction from Trump supporter Herman Cain. Breaking tonight, we have a new poll on the mood of the country, and it ain't good. A Quinnipiac University survey finds a majority of American voters are deeply dissatisfied with the way things are going in this country, including 57% of all voters who think we've lost our identity as a nation. That includes 79% of Republicans and a whopping 85% of all Trump supporters. While our next guest says he understands the anger, he argues it is no excuse to support a candidate like Donald Trump.
Even when the electorate's been angry, that doesn't necessarily, to my mind, mean that you see the success, if I have to call it that, of a candidate who is racist and sexist and xenophobic.
Talking to Michael Dukakis there. Tavis Smiley is a PBS host and author of the new book, 50 for Your Future. Lessons from Down the Road. Tavis, great to see you.
Good to see you, Megan.
So we'll get to the book in a minute.
Yeah.
Trump supporters say he is not a racist, he is not a sexist, he is somebody who has been an entertainer and who has taken a hard line on certain issues that really appeal to part of this so-called angry electorate, like on immigration, and that it's his detractors misrepresenting his remarks that lead people to those conclusions.
I understand the dysfunction of our government and how people can be offended by that, and they're not the only ones, Trump supporters.
The angry folks.
The angry folks. I get that. And yet, the point I tried to make there is what the alternative is to fixing that. And I just don't think that someone who doesn't have the sort of humanity, the sort of civility, the kind of integrity that we need right now to move America in the right direction is an option.
You know, he says I'm not PC. That doesn't mean I don't have humanity.
No, there's nothing wrong with not being PC. The problem is whether or not you're moving America in the direction that it needs to be moving. And when you're trying to turn the clock back on America with some of the comments that he's making.
Like what specifically?
Well, we could do this all day long, but his anti-Muslim comments, his anti-immigrant comments, the way they maltreat persons at these rallies. I mean, this happens every single day. So every time somebody asks me, what are you talking about? This is the stuff that Fox is covering every day that comes out of his mouth. And we act like we don't hear this. But Donald Trump can be disciplined if he, the question is, can he be disciplined enough to win the nomination in the days ahead? My thing is, whether he's disciplined or not, his true colors have already come out. We see Donald Trump for who he is on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm not really sure, as crazy as it sounds, that I know who Donald Trump is, because on any given day, he changes positions on the issue umpteen number of times.
But not long ago, you suggested that you believed Black Americans could get behind Donald Trump, which is a very different message from what we've heard from you recently. So why did you say that to begin with? I
believed from the very beginning, as I've always believed, that black voters have to stop being taken for granted by one party and ignored by another party. And I said to Democrats, in a year where conventional wisdom left the station before the train did, don't assume that black folk are going to be in lockstep.
But what is the evidence that Trump has any sort of bias against African Americans?
I'm not even so much, I could make the case that he has a bias against African Americans in the way that he's campaigned, the things he's said, but let's put it another way. Why should anyone be elected president who runs a segregated campaign, whether it's Trump, Cruz, or anybody else? And what I mean by that is simply this. If you can't campaign to all of America, if you're only campaigning to one slice of America, then how do we believe that you want to be president for all of America? Put another way, if Barack Obama had only campaigned in the ghetto, he wouldn't have been taken seriously as a candidate. You got to campaign to all of America, whether or not they agree with your message. We have to know that you care about all of us and that all of our votes matter to you. And where's the evidence that Donald Trump or Ted Cruz have said to the rest of America that your vote matters to me and I'm willing to compete for it? And here's an agenda that includes you.
I want to ask you about 50 for Your Future. Sure. This is about, you talk about stepping into your authentic life in this book. It's a way to sort of get people to the next best version of themselves.
Yeah, it is. This book is about what kind of people we really want to be. And this election is about what kind of nation we want to be. And I think those two things, Megan, are inextricably linked together. But if we can be our authentic selves or find a way to that, if we can not try to transcend who we are for votes or money or fortune or fame, but just be who we were created to be, and to recognize that today is not refundable, that every single day we got to do what we can to make America a better place to live and work, the country will be made better. I believe very quickly that all of Americans, this is going to sound strange to say, let me say it anyway, I think as Americans, as divided as this country is, we all want the same thing, to live in a nation that will one day be as good as its promise. We ain't there yet. The gap between the promise of America and the possibility in America is still too wide. But if we become our better selves and appeal to our better angels, America can be made, I think, a better nation if we choose the right people who take us in a direction that makes America the nation that we can be proud of.
Great to see you, Tavis.
You too, Megan.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Good luck with the book.
Thank you.
Joining me now with reaction, Herman Cain, former GOP presidential candidate, Fox News contributor, and author of The Right Problems, What the President, Congress, and Every Candidate Should Be Working On. Great to see you, Herman. Thank you for being here. So what are your thoughts, first of all, on that perception that Trump is appealing to too limited a group and not to sort of our better angels?
That's absolutely wrong. The only thing that I agree with Tavis on is the fact that the Democrats have taken advantage of black people for 50 years, and they've gone beyond that. They have conned black people. When Tavis talks about Donald Trump being a racist, running a segregated campaign, all of that is absolutely false. Unfortunately, Tavis has been drinking the Kool-Aid that's been served to the public about all of the negative perceptions. Everything that he touched on as to why he has concluded that those labels fit Donald Trump were based upon taking things out of context. That's where he gets it from, and he not only listens and drinks the Kool-Aid, but he's also sharing it with a lot of black people because he has a large black audience.
Do you think the black vote can get behind Donald? Let's say it's Trump versus Clinton, and you know that the whole like Bill Clinton was the first black president. Like, do you think that there is a real chance that Donald Trump could peel off black voters from Hillary Clinton if those two wind up running against each other?
Absolutely, yes. Donald Trump can peel off some of the black voters, and here's why. When it's down to one-on-one, let's assume for the moment, I know we're not there yet, that it's Trump versus Clinton. What will happen is, if Trump starts to put his platform and his ideas that helps everybody at the front of his speech, those are the sound bites that people will begin to hear. The reason that there's this so-called divide between the perception of black people and women and non-minorities is because that's all they have been fed in terms of some of the spoon-fed sound bites. When it's one-on-one, and if he sticks to his top three priorities, which also dispels what Tavis is saying about Trump not running a campaign for all of America benefits from replacing the tax code. All of America benefits from enforcing immigration laws. And all of America benefits by repealing and replacing Obamacare. Trump has been very explicit about that.
But to what extent is this, coming through? You know, it's the media does what the media does, but to what extent does he bear some responsibility for that? You know, rather than just staying on message, doing the tweets and going on like down these roads that get him in trouble. You know, if he would stick to those messages that are so popular with a huge faction of the Republican base, would he not be better off?
I absolutely agree. I would not have advised him. If I were advising him, and I'm not one of his official advisors, I would say, stay on message. Stay away from all of this stuff that creates political distractions, that creates fodder for people to take that up to create the perception that they want. So you're right. He is partly to blame for some of the negative perceptions out there. But I know Donald Trump. He's not a racist, he's not a bigot, and he is not running a segregated campaign, as Tavis said.
It's all about infrastructure now. You got to mend fences and build bridges, and that takes you to the promised land. Herman Cain, great to see you.
Thanks, Megan. Good to see you.
So we are also hearing that the Cruz campaign and Trump campaign may be considering a new approach to winning voters to get them over to the 1237 number. And Dana Perino is next to talk about what those plans are. Well, in the hours following the Wisconsin primary, we heard reports of a reset for Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. New reports indicate strategy changes may be underway in both campaigns as these two candidates look to improve their chances of winning the GOP nomination. Trace Gallagher has that live from our West Coast newsroom. Trace?
And Megan, the Trump campaign is pushing back against the whole shifting gears scenario, saying there is no turmoil, only the natural maturation of the campaign. They say in coming weeks, Donald Trump will give a series of speeches aimed at strengthening the military, reforming education, even laying out how he would pick Supreme Court justices. But critics say it's becoming clear that internal disputes that have simmered inside Camp Trump are now burning hot, and that in the wake of the Wisconsin loss and a series of missteps and so-called misspeaks, including comments that infuriated both sides of the abortion debate, staffing changes could be coming. Sources tell NBC News that campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, who Trump is fiercely loyal to, has been unable to demand that Donald Trump be comprehensively prepared for interviews and public appearances. Analysts believe the campaign will soon add a few political heavy hitters, and in an open letter, former White House press secretary Ari Fleischer offered Trump these tips. Stop fighting with everyone and don't be so nasty. Get your facts right. Learn more policy. And as for Ted Cruz, Critics point out that still only 2 of his Senate colleagues have endorsed him, South Carolina's Lindsey Graham and Utah's Mike Lee. Many senators say it's because Cruz serves only his own ambition. Now, Politico is reporting the Cruz campaign may be trying to end the grudge and move closer to the GOP establishment by trying to woo his colleagues. Former Texas Republican Senator Phil Gramm is now on board, saying the only way to not lose the presidential election, the House and the Senate, is with Ted Cruz. Megan.
Trace, thank you. Joining me now with more, Dana Perino, the former White House press secretary under President George W. Bush and co-host of The Five. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so let's start with Ted Cruz. If you were advising him on his communication strategy, what would you tell him to do?
Well, I'm humble enough to know that I'm not advising any campaign and they can take this or leave it. But here's
they would
a couple
all
things.
want to hire you if
I hope
they
so.
could.
If you're listening, this is a couple of things that I think you should do. One, as Trace was just saying, Ted Cruz needs to seal the deal with the non-Trump voters. And he's made some headway in that. The Phil Gramm endorsement is significant in Republican circles because people look to him as somebody that they would love to have his endorsement, as somebody that they admire, especially on economics, a strong senator with a long history of public service.
Okay, so make nice with the so-called demonized establishment.
Right, and it can't be. The second part I was going to say is that he can't just have people voting against Trump to help him.
They have
right?
to be voting
you have
for
to be
him.
voting for Cruz for a reason, and I know Cruz knows that, but he's going to have to figure out a way to do what.
What about his style? Because he's very sort of preachy in his delivery and like dramatic, and I understand that's for effect, but it can put a wall between you and your voters.
That's true, and so this week you had a town hall with him where it was just you and Ted Cruz having a chat, and it was actually a lot more accessible. And I think that because I've had a chance one time to see him in just a closed setting, that perhaps they could do some smaller groups where he is able to show that he can hang with people. Like, he's not the biggest nerd you ever knew, but he's super smart. So I think that that would be a good thing. His cadence, his speeches, at this point in the campaign, it's really hard to change that. Look
That's
at
just
Hillary
how he
Clinton.
speaks. That really
She
is
can't
just how he
change it.
speaks.
Donald Trump's not going to change the way he speaks. That's just the way they are, and you have to make the most of it.
All right, what about Trump? What would you tell him from now to July? You're trying to consolidate the Republican Party behind you.
Well, talk about being humble. I mean, I know that he's not going to listen to this advice in terms of what I would tell him to say or do, but I do hope he would listen to this, or his people would, and I think that maybe they would, given Trace's report. I think that Donald Trump should spend an entire 24 hours alone, by himself, without electronics, and a chance to reflect and think and to walk around, to not have anybody telling him and picking on him and telling him what to do or say, where he can't react to people, he can't blame anyone for anyone, because the presidency is a very lonely office, and you are going to be alone making decisions, and you're the only one in the room that can actually make those decisions. It doesn't matter how many advisors you have around you, but take some time to reflect on how do you want this campaign to move forward, and just spend a day, not in manic campaign mode, because it's exhausting.
What would you tell him to improve some of these numbers with whom he's struggling, women in particular? Let's start there.
Well, I think that having Melania out there for the interview was fine, but no one's actually going to vote for you because of your wife. I don't think. I think they can help. Like, it can be a great person to have on your behalf. Usually men marry up, so you want to showcase your wives. I mean, that's good. I don't know exactly what he can do on women. I think that in some ways that judgment call has already been made, and it's really hard to turn around that perception. But what Tavis Smiley and Herman Cain were just talking about, I do think that he could make some inroads, with the African American community and Latinos, because when he's talking about some of these messages about better economy, those guys aren't looking out for you. I would.
That resonates
I'm not
across
beholden
the
to
board.
anybody else. I want your families to be safe too. Come over to my side, at least come and listen to me, and to be more in listening mode than into talking mode with those groups. I think that might help. He also has a huge problem with the youth vote. And again, I'm not exactly sure how he does that, except if they are going to add more campaign staff, I think that probably having some more people that could speak on his behalf that are appealing to young people, that could help a little bit.
Lord knows he's certainly working things on Twitter, which is very popular with young people.
That's what I'm saying also. Like,
Right.
just
step
stop.
away.
I don't actually.
That's what O'Reilly always says. He says, he goes, Kelly, I don't have a blueberry. I don't have a blackberry. I just think. That's what I do. I think.
The amount they're tweeting is directly proportional to the decrease in support, in my opinion.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
Dana Perino, everybody. Well, folks, we're also feeling the burn in Wisconsin last night, but will Sanders' big win translate into an actual path to the nomination? That's next. Well, Bernie Sanders' big win in Wisconsin last night marked his 6th victory out of the last 7 contests. But despite that, experts are saying he faces a nearly impossible road to the nomination. Trace Gallagher has that report from our West Coast newsroom. Trace?
You know, Megan, going into the Wisconsin primary, most polls showed Bernie Sanders leading Hillary Clinton by about 3 points, so his victory certainly wasn't surprising. What was surprising is how fast the networks, including Fox News, called it for Sanders, meaning he surpassed even the most promising polls. But experts say the most troubling part of Wisconsin for Hillary Clinton are the exit polls. Take a look. Among young voters, those under 45, Sanders dominated by a margin of 73 to 26%, and it did not stop there. He also won among men, 64% to 35. And in perhaps the biggest shock of all, Bernie Sanders took the female vote, albeit by the narrowest of margins, but still a shocker. After his big win, Sanders highlighted the momentum of his campaign and pointed out that he's leading Republican frontrunner Donald Trump by greater margins than Clinton, but clearly not all good news for Sanders. He lost black voters 69 to 31% and non-voters 57 to 43%. And as you point out, his delegate count makes it almost impossible to get the nomination. But when you consider that just a year ago, Clinton led Sanders by 55 points in national polling, his night in Wisconsin has got to give the Clinton campaign pause. Next up, by the way, 2 states with big delegate prizes, New York on April 19th, Pennsylvania on the 26th, where Clinton leads Sanders by a mere 6%.
Wow.
Megan.
Trace, thank you. We'll be right back. Tomorrow, we've got Charles Krauthammer and Newt Gingrich. Meantime, go to Facebook.com/The Kelly File and on Twitter @Megyn Kelly and let me know what you think about the shadow primary. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Megyn Kelly.